For about 100 years now, it's been a force in the shadows and on the streets, a movement that was literally born in violence to fight violence. Today, we're going to trace that entire century-long story of anti-fascism, from its very first street brawls in Italy all the way to the clashes you see today, all to understand a movement that was born in pure rage.
And this really gets us to the core question, the one that's going to hang over our entire journey here. It's a question that has, followed this movement through every single phase of its existence. Is this a vital defense mechanism for a free society, a necessary antibody, you could say, or does it risk becoming the very thing it's trying to destroy?
So our story has to begin in post-World War I Italy. The whole place is just a powder keg. The economy's in shambles, tensions are through the roof, and this new political force is clawing its way out of the chaos. Benito Mussolini and his black shirts. Yeah, this quote from the historian Amadeo Bordiga, it just nails the feeling at the time. The ruling class, the establishment, they felt their power just slipping away. It seemed like the working class was on the very brink of taking over. It felt like it was inevitable. But, as we all know, history loves a plot twist. And man, this timeline just shows you how fast that twist happened. Socialists start winning local elections, and bam, the backlash is immediate and it's violent. In November 1920, fascists literally attack Bologna's city hall, and it kicks off this wave of terror. And out of that fire, the very first militant anti-fascist group is born, the Arditi del Popolo. But their efforts, well, they were a disaster. A general strike just collapses. And get this, in cities like Bari, where the workers actually won their street fights against the fascists, the state itself rolls in with soldiers and artillery to crush them.
So why did it fail so badly? Well, it was really a perfect storm of division and, frankly, collusion. The mainstream left parties, they just abandoned them, leaving the movement totally isolated. The state was actively helping the fascists. And while these fascists were running around on so-called punitive expeditions, the main response was just passive strikes that did nothing. The fascists were united, they were organized, and their opposition was completely, fatally fractured.
Okay, so from Italy, the story now jumps to the absolute chaos of Weimar Germany. This is where the movement gets that iconic name and logo that you see everywhere, but it's also where it suffers its most catastrophic failure. So in 1932, the German Communist Party, the KPD, creates Antifascistische Aktion. You definitely know that logo. The two flags were meant to be this powerful symbol, right? A united front, bringing together communists and the more moderate socialists to fight the rising threat of Adolf Hitler. But here's the thing. That unity, it was basically an illusion. And this is the reason why. The KPD was following this completely disastrous ideology called the social fascist doctrine. This theory, which came down from Moscow, argued that the real enemy, the main enemy, wasn't the actual Nazis. No, it was the moderate social democrats. The thinking was that they were just a softer version of fascism, one that was tricking the working class and stopping a real communist revolution. And the result was an absolute catastrophe. Instead of joining with the Social Democrats to build a wall against the Nazis, the communists spent all their energy fighting them. The lesson here is just brutal and simple. The greatest gift you can ever give your enemy is to fight amongst yourselves. This split completely paralyzed any real resistance, and it helped pave the way for Hitler to become chancellor in 1933. Now, after World War II, you'd think that would be the end of it. But the idea of anti-fascism didn't just vanish. Instead, it became this kind of ghost, haunting a divided Europe. And it would split into two totally different things on either side of the Iron Curtain, which is what leads to the movement we recognize today. And this chart just lays the split out perfectly. Over in East Germany, anti-fascism becomes the official state religion. It's a top-down ideology, a tool used by the authoritarian government to justify its own power. But in West Germany, a completely different story. In the 80s, it's reborn from the ground up, inside punk and anarchist scenes. It becomes this autonomous, aggressive street movement that takes on that shorter, punchier name, Antifa. Meanwhile, across the channel in Britain, a pretty similar street-level thing pops up, Anti-Fascist Action, or AFA. Their whole philosophy was no platform. And that meant exactly what it sounds like, denying fascists any chance to speak or organize. And they were willing to use physical force to do it. Their big moment was the 1992 Battle of Waterloo, where they literally brawled with and routed a far-right march. But sound familiar? Just like its predecessors in Italy and Germany, AFA eventually tore itself apart with the same old weakness, political infighting. So As these ideas start to cross the Atlantic, they land in a really different environment. The American context wasn't so much about party politics. It was shaped more by this deep, growing distrust in institutions, this feeling that unseen forces were pulling the strings, which set the stage for a whole new kind of conflict.
And you can actually see this mood of deep skepticism in the public record. I mean, you look at Freedom of Information Act requests, and you see a public that's desperately searching for hidden truth. Everything from the lingering secrets of World War II to digging into the darkest corners of the Cold War and its secret mind control programs, all the way to the huge, sprawling conspiracies of our own time. And it's in this fertile ground of just profound distrust that the modern American anti-fascist movement really takes root. So how exactly did this European movement adapt to the US? Well, it brought the old philosophies with it, but it developed these new, highly visible tactics that were perfect for a new century and, let's be honest, a new media landscape. To really get the modern movement, you first have to understand the Black Bloc. And this is so critical. This is not a group. There are no membership cards. It's a tactic. Protesters dress in all black to create this anonymous, unified mass, which makes it almost impossible for police to pick out individuals. It had been used in Europe for years, but it exploded into American public consciousness at the huge anti-WTO protests in Seattle back in 1999. And in the 21st century, things have escalated dramatically. From a really bloody riot in Sacramento in 2016 to these long, drawn-out battles over controversial speakers at UC Berkeley in 2017. And it all kind of culminated in Portland in 2020 with these nightly clashes aimed at federal buildings. And right here, something really important shifted. For a lot of the people on the ground, the definition of fascist had now grown to include the state itself. That is a massive escalation. Well, an escalation like that is guaranteed to get a response from the state, which brings us right back to the paradox we started this whole thing with. How does a government deal with a movement that sees the government itself as the enemy? So you hear the political talk all the time, right? These high-profile calls to label Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. But here's the legal reality. You can't. American law lets you designate foreign terror groups, but not domestic ones. And anyway, since Antifa is just this decentralized idea with no leaders or structure, there's no actual thing to designate. And you can see this in FBI memos, which focus on the criminal actions of specific people, not on the ideology as a whole. Which brings us right back to where we started. After 100 years, the history shows this same pattern again and again. A movement born to fight a very clear enemy, but one that is repeatedly broken apart by its own infighting, or one that just keeps expanding its definition of who the enemy is. So the question that's left hanging isn't just about whether it's a necessary antibody for democracy. It's about whether its own rage, the very thing that defines it, can ever actually be contained. That is the unresolved paradox at the very heart of this century-long story.